Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is joining. This is Vivek Kumar, Practice Director from Everest Group. I lead our healthcare pair operations research. And with me, I have my colleagues Sabya Sachi and Sulbhi today to talk about what's happening in the healthcare pair market, especially on the theme of rewiring the healthcare operations in the AI era. Uh, Before we start, we'd also love to see who we have on board. So please feel free to share where you are logging from in the private chat. And then we can potentially begin. So, question to you, Surbi. You have been speaking to a lot of healthcare enterprises, healthcare peers around what's happening in the market. A lot of things are changing. There are questions around what will operations look like. But before that, there are certain challenges which I have seen they talking about a lot. Would you like to share some thoughts on what kind of challenges have you seen in the market, especially from a peer standpoint?
Sure. So, right now, the market is under a lot of pressure from multiple directions all at once. So, it's a convergence of pressures which happens to be strategic, operational, regulatory, as well as technological. And I think the combination of all these factors is something which is making the moment so disruptive. First and foremost, of course, there is a challenge of margin compression. So the payers are dealing with elevated medical cost trends. They are dealing with rising utilization norms. And to couple up all of this, there is absolutely no room for error. CMS is trying to control the cost of care by introducing new models, but a widespread adoption of all of them is yet to be seen. So, for payer enterprises, this is creating quite a difficult balancing act because you have to conserve your margins, but without hiking the premiums and also maintaining your provider relationships. Um, the second challenge that's coming to my mind is, of course, in terms of growing complexity of the government programs. In Medicare Advantage, payers are navigating reimbursement pressure, risk adjustment scrutiny, then some certain star rating volatility. Earlier last year, I think we saw a lot of disruptions in the Medicaid market with respect to redeterminations and the payers basically are facing challenges managing the market volatility, the compliance, and the profits from the government program simultaneously. Um, Talking about the next challenge is, of course, regulatory burdens. It is transcending gradually from simply being limited to a policy discussion to, of course, an enterprise wide execution. Let's talk about interoperability. Let's talk about prior authorization, data exchanges. So these are no longer future state achievables or future state aspirations, but rather nowadays they are mandated capabilities. The CMS's interoperability and prior authorization final rule, it adds requirements to for improved data sharing, streamlining prior authorization. And for this, the peers, they need clean data sharing norms, cleaner data flows, faster decisioning, and of course, a lot of better coordination in between the operational teams as well as the technological teams. So compliance can no longer be considered to be a separate bucket altogether. It is deeply tied to all form of core operations as well as platform modernization. This was the third challenge and final, and of course, this is the talk of the town. Is of course with respect to technological innovations and AI. So everyone, right? Most of the large enterprises they are wanting to do automation. They are wanting to implement AI, better workflows, more intelligent member and provider engagement, intelligent processes, right? But at the same time, they are grappling with issues which is related to a legacy operating model and technological debt. They are carrying fragmented platforms, they are carrying siloed data, highly manual back office processes. So the transformation for them is not exactly happening on a clean slate, right? The organizations, they're simultaneously trying to run claims, trying to manage care, control costs, and all of this is making their execution part of it like way more difficult. And to couple up with all of them, they are wanting to do technological transformations, but facing challenges to prove an ROI on these transformation initiatives. So the payers are investing in digital transformation initiatives, but the leadership teams here are becoming way more strict and stringent in terms of how are they actually investments have to be tied back to administrative efficiency or better compliance or lower operation. Or primarily, the outcome basically has to be shown in all tangible terms, and all of this while ensuring a consistent member and a provider experience. And I think all of this is coupling the challenges of the payers all together. So when the payers are maneuvering through all of this, they are being forced to rethink their entire enterprise-wide operating model. They are reassessing their core capabilities, what they need to scale, whom they need to partner with, where should they be implementing point solutions, where should be moving out of point solutions, and which are the vendors that can actually support measurable outcomes for them. So this is resulting in an altogether enterprise-wide shift. Okay, with vendor relationships getting impacted, vendor relationships are changing. Buyers are asking higher ROI questions, right? So enterprises are rather preferring nowadays vendors who can be more like strategic partners and helping them across ops, compliance, experience, as well as transformation. So all in all, the entire continuum. So yeah, it's a challenging space to exist and work on nowadays.
Absolutely. And thank you, Survi, for sharing such detailed insights. It's actually quite an interesting time to be in the market, right? Where we are seeing payers not just grappling with the legacy challenges, which has always been a burden for them as they manage their operations, but also the emerging challenges, right? For example, you spoke about AI. Everybody wants to implement AI, but they're not sure about how or what they want to implement, right? And I'm sure that our viewers who are joining as well, like, they might also resonate with some of these challenges. If not, please feel free to share what is the other additional challenge that you might have been experiencing in the chat as well. And yeah, so with that, I think it's quite an interesting trend, and that's how I believe a lot of the relationships within enterprises and service providers is changing as well, right? We see a lot of new investments happening. We see payers asking for a lot of new capabilities. But Sabyasachi, in your experience, right, you have been tracking this space for almost what, quite a long time now, right? So how is this translating to relationships between the healthcare payers and service providers?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, Vivek. So I think it's threefold in nature. Firstly, what we're seeing is that vendor consolidation is becoming absolutely real. And plans are no longer comfortable with just managing a fragmented ecosystem where you have niche vendors and there's a blurred accountability on how are the outcomes being managed. In fact, in one of our recent conversations, a health plan leader told us that what health plans are now looking to do is reduce it from, say, a 15 plus vendor ecosystem to just a 4 to 5 one. And this is not to eliminate the competition, but this is to just get more scale, to have a clearer ownership of outcomes and just be able to manage the performance better. Secondly, like we've been seeing, right, the talk of the town is AI, and the bar with AI has just risen very sharply. And buyers are just no longer impressed with AI being patched on to legacy workflows and just acting as a productivity tool. In fact, in a recent conversation, a senior health plan leader told us that AI patching is just absolutely not working and does not scale to an enterprise level, does not give the real outcomes that the plans are looking for. So now, with the service providers, what the pairs are looking for is that the vendors redesign the workflows in such a way that AI is embedded into the workflows, and the service providers put guardrails, governance, and compliance checks into the contracts and into the workflows, where this would include human in the loops. This would improve, the thresholds for high risk decisions, and this would include, compliance monitoring and bias monitoring. And thirdly, I think more importantly, payers are moving from an essentially FTE or PMPM based commercial model to a more outcome based commercial model, where they're not just saying that, okay, fix just this SLA for me, fix that SLA for me. They're saying that fix, say, the auto adjudication rate with the claims accuracy. So vendors are being pushed to show successful AI execution, productivity improvement, and business results. So for example, if a health plan is partnering with a vendor, they're saying that, okay, during my go live, the claims adjudication rate right now is at 80%. In the next 12 months, I wanted it to go to 95% plus. And if you're not able to meet that target, that would be a penalty or a risk that the service provider would have to bear.
Right. That's an interesting point that you bring, Sabyasachi, right? I mean, we have seen in the market previously as well that there were certain traditional models, and those models used to exist and work with the health plans. But the point around health plans exclusively asking for ROI, and that too in a sharing model, I think that's something which is definitely going to reshape a lot of the conversations going forward, especially demanding these service providers to have more skin in the game, not just bringing with a solution that can bring some sort of an efficiency improvement, but also providing an outcome which can be realistic as well. And I think that's probably one of the insights that we also that you guys also uncovered as part of the peak matrix assessment, right? Which our viewers can see on the screen. Uh, Survey to you. I mean, you were part of this assessment, and I'm sure that you would have gotten some really interesting insights out of that as well. So, from your vantage point, you spoke to so many other providers and enterprises too. But based on what buyers are saying, what is it that they're expecting to invest going forward? Are they planning to invest in the same set of traditional areas, or are they thinking about something new, something more at a grand scale, something which is not been imagined? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, of course, during the process of this assessment, we spoke to buyers. At the same time, we spoke to many service providers as well. So I think we got a lens of, I think, both the continuums and both the sides of the table. And investments nowadays are being made in areas which is high friction, high leakage, which was not of that importance to the payers, but now as the margin pressures are increasing. And I think the payers nowadays have also become cost sensitive. And I guess even you mentioned about for them realizing the ROI on all their initiatives. So the high friction and the high leakage areas for them are becoming like extremely important. And one such area, which is absolutely at the top of my mind, is of course payment integrity. Payment integrity is becoming a major investment area for the healthcare payers because, again, it can be tied directly to margin protection, and that too without having to rely heavily on premium hikes or any sort of broad cost cutting initiatives. Right? Plans are under pressure to improve financial performance, but at the same time, they also want to make sure that the claims are paid accurately, absolutely in the first time. Payment integrity is expected to now go beyond the recovery mechanisms. That is, if even if a wrong claim is paid, we go over to the recovery mechanisms, that particular portion of it, to rather becoming much more central to the entire operations. It now touches everything from eligibility, from coordination of benefits, from coding accuracy, contract pricing, fraud, waste, and abuse. That is the entire value chain essentially. And one of the biggest shifts that the enterprises are seeing in this market is, of course, moving from retrospective post recovery to predictive pre play claims editing. So plans are actively using analytics and AI. So AI is also coming into picture here to identify likely coding errors, duplication of claims, any sort of pricing mismatches that is supposedly happening. And the logic here is like pretty simple. It's far better to prevent a leakage rather than to pay and recover later, which is of course more hassle worthy. And the enterprises, along with this, along to moving to prepay payment integrity, it is also investing in stronger clinical and coding validation mechanisms to make sure that the diagnosis, the procedures, the supporting documentation, everything is actually in place and justify what is actually being built. They are also investing actively to ensure payment responsibility accuracy. So, more often than not, many of the errors which is happening in the payment integrity space, they don't happen to be fraud cases at all. They are coming from questions such as who should actually be paying the claims, whether the member was eligible or not, whether the entire content number benefits was being coordinated correctly, or whether the payment matched the provider contract. So all of it can actually be solved by keeping some certain checks and balances in place in which the payers are actively investing or they're looking to actively invest in the very near future. Um, so this is what is coming to the top of my mind with respect to payment integrity. But there is another area that I would like to highlight. That is with respect to risk and quality management. So again, till I think a couple of years back, it's supposedly risk and quality management was supposedly an ancillary function, right? So not a end-to-end payer operations functioning. But nowadays, risk and quality management is becoming a major investment area because, again, it is bearing a direct impact on the financial performance, on compliance, and competitive positioning. If we say that risk is actually helping plans get paid accurately for the acuity of the members whom they are covering, quality management is becoming important because it is influencing outcomes. It is influencing member experience and performance on different measures. The most important of them, of course, being the star rating ecosystem. So they are strategic lever. They are being increasingly considered to be strategic levers for both revenue protection as well as long-term growth. In this particular space, there are two or three areas that I would like to highlight where the plans are actively investing. And one among them is, of course, building a stronger evidence and intervention engine. So they are investing in having better audit ready documentation because the plans are aware that if diagnosis and care gaps are not clearly supported, they will have problem defending the value generated later. The second area, of course, is prospective risk adjustment. Just like the importance is actually shifting to prepay payment integrity, here also the importance is actually shifting to prospective risk adjustment. That is, rather than only relying on retrospective reviews, they are trying to close gaps absolutely at the point of care. And the third thing that I would like to highlight here quickly is, of course, on the convergence of risk and quality. So, plans are increasingly beginning to recognize that the same member evidence can be used for supporting both risk as well as quality workflows, right? So, whether they are going for RAF capture or they're going for HEDIS related workflows, stars, or any other quality initiatives. As a result, they are nowadays looking at shared evidence layers. That is, you're having unified workflows and a tighter coordination across the programs instead of running risk initiatives and quality initiatives in silos. So in quality management and risk adjustment, these are the 3 to 4 areas in which plans are they want to invest in, and they are looking at people or the service providers who can actually bring in the capabilities. A little difficult, of course, because even service providers are trying to build their capabilities in this particular area. But yes, this is an area of active investments and is likely to pick up in the future. So, yes, I
That's
believe that.
interesting. Hmm.
Yes, please go ahead, Vivek.
That's interesting, Survi. I think you mentioned a couple of very interesting points, and the areas which you mentioned, right? Those are rightly the areas that payers will definitely need to look at. But at the same time, payers will also need to look at how can they get these capabilities as well, right? Because a lot of these are nuanced capabilities. Maybe not every vendor has that, and the ones that who may have, they also need to be AI ready too, right? So, what is it that you are seeing in the service provider market? What kind of investments are they making to meet up with these evolving demands of payers?
Sure. So, in order to meet the evolving demands of the players, of course, the service providers, some of them are niche service providers. Let's say they are only focusing on the care content, or they are only essentially focusing on, let's say, provider data management or provider credentialing for that particular matter. So what they are doing here is, of course, engaging into meaningful partnerships with other verticalized players so that they can also be well equipped with all these capabilities. So that is one particular area. And of course, they're also investing actively in AI. But before I move on to AI, I think Sabya was also tracking the CCM and the UM ops space like really closely. And there are a couple of interesting partnerships that we have seen in the very recent past that talks about how the different service providers are actually upping up their care capabilities and the clinical operations capabilities. Sapya, would you want to take a deep dive into this particular area as well?
Yes, Survey, I think that's a very interesting insight. And what is interesting on the clinical and the utilization management side, right, is what we recently also discovered when we did the clinical and care management state of the market report, is that the near term investment to a lot of extent is focusing on two things: intelligent prior authorization operations and AI led clinical decision support. Because as you rightly mentioned, right, with the CMS interoperability and the prior authorization rule, and the new CMS health ecosystem, which has been signed by the major national payers, the expectations with prior authorization are changing drastically. In fact, in our recent conversations, some of the expectations of the health plan leaders is to reduce the timelines from say 72 hours to 72 milliseconds. So if we could if service providers could sort of capture that niche, and the technology stack behind this is very clear, is that intelligent automation and advanced clinical analytics which are prescriptive in nature, which sort of tell you the next best actions with a high risk member, those are essentially being preferred. Those are the high priority areas, while we're also seeing rise of end-to-end integrated care management platforms, and obviously the rise of generative and agentic AI systems. And in practical terms, what this means is that payers are spending more on areas such as electronic prior authorization, such as AI-based solutions, population health analytics, and digital quality improvement tools, which you rightly mentioned, right? That on the risk and quality side, there's some nuanced needs that the payers are looking for. And the reason is pretty simple. If you look at a process like prior authorization, it is very judgment and manual heavy at this point. And that's why there's a push from CMS as well to increase the adoption of electronic prior authorization, to reduce the submission of faxes and documents. And what service providers are, what healthcare providers rather, are also really looking for is tighter prior authorization sort of criteria and a faster timeline on the prior authorization part. So I think, as you rightly mentioned, that's a pretty interesting area that we're tracking.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Sabyasachi. I think those are some pretty interesting insights. Now, absolutely. Clinical and care management, some of the areas, especially around electronic prior authorization and the way the entire utilization management can be digitally enabled, most likely and most importantly, from an end-to-end perspective, that is one of the go-to areas, because a lot of the health plans that even I've seen the market, they're struggling a lot with their MLR pressures, with the costs going off the roofs. It becomes very difficult for them to ensure that the margins are still protected, and especially in this kind of climate and environment where a lot of things are getting disrupted, it's quite important as well, right? So but the next question that actually comes to my mind is that I'm sure that they might also be thinking about how do they select the right set of vendors, right? What would be the decision criteria? What would be their purchasing themes? Is it something which you are changing or seeing in the market considerably? Would you like to share any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Vivek, I think that's a very interesting point to consider. And as the viewers would probably see on the screen, the traditional sort of sourcing considerations have matured to a point where earlier the discussion was fairly on traditional asks, that can you reduce my cost? Can you provide me with more skilled talent? Can you run processes reliably for me? And those things still matter. They are still table stakes, but the sourcing considerations have just moved so much higher. When I talk from a broader pair operations lens, buyers are now evaluating partners across, if I say broadly, three dimensions. The first one is obviously, like you mentioned, right? With the high MLRs, there's a lot of margin pressure. So, what health plans are looking for is measurable savings and efficiency. And they want it to be defined in such a way that they want the service providers to show us a credible path, that you can reduce X percentage of manual work for me when I partner with you, that you can improve my throughput of, say, a function like claims, and you can deliver business outcomes, at the highest level. And secondly, what we're seeing is that they're placing a lot of weight on operational resilience and risk management. We see something like the incident with Change Healthcare, right? There's a lot of scrutiny on operational reliance on protecting the day-to-day operations, with health plans already struggling to maintain memberships in the Medicaid as well as the Medicare Advantage businesses. There's a much more prevalence given to these parameters. And thirdly, what we're seeing is that domain expertise mixed with technical expertise is what payers are really wanting. It's no longer enough for service providers to just know the pair operations. What they want is that they have a strong data analytics and automation layer which they bring along with them, which gives them meaningful gains, and reduces the unit cost over the time. So essentially the shift is from labor and execution to targeting efficiency and resilience. And if I take the example of clinical and care management, right, In clinical and care management, the traditional drivers like cost reduction, domain expertise, and the access to skilled talent still non-negotiable, given that it's still a very judgment-heavy process. But buyers are very much, asking service providers to deliver on the next layer, which is digital tools, AI-powered next-generation solutions, and outcome-based pricing models. So what buyers want is that you embed the AI into our workflows and you provide a strong analytics automation layer, which sort of gives us meaningful gains. And there's a penalty which is tied to the service provider if they cannot sort of match those rates. And what we're seeing right now, a very interesting trend that's happening is KPI bundles, where they're saying that, okay, don't just fix just prior authorization rates for me, reduce the timelines while also supporting the clinical criteria which is making the prior authorization decisions, sort of help me with the member and the appeals that are happening with the health plan members. So I think that is the real shift in the sourcing considerations that we're seeing in the market.
Got it. And thank you so much. I think this is quite detailed, Sabyasachi, and absolutely the need of the hour as well as payers reimagine their operations from a typical labor arbitrage model to a more efficient tech-led, AI-led model. And that's how the market is also expected to evolve too, right? There needs to be investment specifically into capabilities that are not just complementary, but also serve as a joint bundle of offerings to make or plan for the next generation, or rather say the future proofing operations of the future, right? So thank you all once again. Thank you to our viewers who have joined. If you have any questions or if you'd like to specifically discuss any topic, please feel free to scan through the QR code that's at the top right of your screen, and we can take up those questions accordingly as well. Thank you so much once again to everybody who joined. Thank you, Sabyasachi and Surbi, for sharing your thoughts. Lovely to have you here.